In the world of personal finance, whether you should pay off your mortgage first or invest is one of the most hotly debated topics. Of course, you have Dave Ramsey on the one side who suggests that millionaires typically pay off their mortgage first and then start investing. And then on the other side, you have pretty much everybody else who looks at the numbers and looks at the math and says it's quite obvious that you should be investing before you pay off your mortgage, especially if you can get a higher return on your investments than what you're paying in interest. And I'm not going to lie, I was once one of the believers in the idea that you should invest first. In fact, in 2012, I wrote an entire book on this very topic. And well, what I can tell you is that my views have changed. And not because the math doesn't work out in the favor of investing over paying off your mortgage, but because the psychology doesn't. And in this video, I'm going to walk you through the math, and I'm going to talk about whether or not you should be prioritizing paying off your mortgage or investing. Because the answer is that it probably comes down to a few simple things, and most of that has to do with what's in between your ears. But before we get into it, my name's Nolan Matthias, and if you want to thrive financially, this is the place for you. So do me a favor, hit that subscribe button and hit the like button so more people like you can see this video. It really means a lot to me when you do go ahead and press that subscribe button. Okay, so let's get into it. Let's talk about whether or not you should be prioritizing paying off your mortgage or prioritizing investing. And I want to make this the definitive and simple guide as to whether or not you should be investing or paying off your mortgage first. So what I'm going to do is run you through the numbers real quickly, and I'm going to foreshadow this that yes, in fact, the numbers, at least in theory, do make more sense for people to invest before they pay down their mortgage. But that is in theory. And I'm going to talk about why Dave Ramsey is probably right that most people should probably be prioritizing paying off their mortgage. And a lot of that comes down to risk. So let's start by talking about the two lines of thinking here. Of course, you have Dave Ramsey who talks about debt, talks about risk, and talks about the fact that when you have debt and you are investing, you are actually increasing your risk exponentially. And this is true. Anytime you have debt and you are using that debt in order to facilitate investing, you are not only risking your money, the potential money that you could lose, but you are also increasing your risk because if you were to lose that money, you could put yourself in a significantly worse position, especially when you consider that that money could have been used to guarantee your returns by paying off your mortgage and creating a significant amount of financial freedom for you once your mortgage was gone. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't understand the numbers and you shouldn't understand the reasons why you might choose to pay off your mortgage first and why you might choose to invest. So let's start by looking at the hypothetical situation here. And this is the hypothetical mortgage payoff returns. So we're going to make some assumptions here. We're going to assume that we're going to use a 30-year mortgage at a 5% interest rate. Then we're going to assume that we have a $400,000 mortgage, which equates to about a $1,610 payment. Now, we're also going to assume that you have about $1,000 in extra money every single month that you can choose to either invest or apply towards your mortgage. Now, I'm going to stop right here for a second because there's one important point to note, and that is that the best way to secure your future and secure your finances is by not overbuying your home. So typically the rule of thumb we use is that you don't want any more than about 25% of your income going towards your housing costs, even though the banks and the lenders will approve you for significantly more than that. That 25% number allows you to still have enough money to either put towards paying off the mortgage faster or put towards your retirement. Once you get up to the limits of what you qualify for, well, it creates a scenario where at least in the beginning, you will very much be house poor, and if you don't get a significant raise in the first 5 or 10 years, well, that continues on until you eventually get rid of the mortgage. So buying properly and buying not at the limits of what you qualify for, even though that may seem like it might be hard, is the first step in making sure you have the money available to actually have a secure future. So think about that when you're making your buying decisions if you haven't done so already. And if you have purchased a property and you're feeling like you're at the edge of whether or not you can afford it, well, it might be a good time to consider perhaps selling, downsizing, and getting a home that's a little bit more affordable, even though that may mean that you're going to give up some of your creature comforts. But at the end of the day, if you lose your home, you will lose your creature comforts and you're going to find yourself in the same position anyways. So make sure that you have a mortgage that is the right size for your income. That doesn't mean getting the maximum mortgage you can afford. That means getting a mortgage that is actually comfortable for you to be able to make the payments on for the entire life of the mortgage. Now, we're also going to assume that you are going to use that $1,000 in extra payments to pay off the mortgage early. And what that is going to do is it's going to allow you to pay off the mortgage 14 years earlier, 14 years and 1 month to be exact. And then in this example, we're going to assume that once you've paid off the mortgage for the remaining 16 years, you're going to take the full $2,610, which is the amount of the payment, as well as that additional $1,000, and you're going to apply that to investing and earning a return. Now, in both this example and the next one I'm going to show you, where we put investing as a priority, we are going to assume a 30-year time horizon. And then last but not least, we're going to assume that you can get a 10% rate of return on your investment. Now, this is assuming you're investing in something like an S&P 500 index and that you never sell any of the shares that you purchase, and that you're just in general going to be a smart investor and not be a below average investor, which, by the way, most people typically don't outperform the markets. And I'll talk about the mistakes that people make with respect to their beliefs around their investing abilities in a second. But if you take this scenario, you assume that you're going to pay off the mortgage 14 years early, then you're going to invest the full amount for the remaining 16 years on the mortgage. Well, this is the return that you have after 30 years. You end up with $1,186,000, and you end up with a paid off home. Now, that seems like it's a pretty good proposition, especially considering that you get to own your home earlier and you don't have to worry about the bank being able to take it away from you. If something happens in your life, you have unexpected medical bills, or you have a job loss or something else that interrupts your finances, if you have a paid off home, none of that stuff really matters because nobody can take your home away. Now, in the next scenario, we're going to discuss the hypothetical investing returns. So exact same scenario here, 30-year mortgage at 5%, a $400,000 mortgage, a $1,610 payment. But in this scenario, we're going to take that $1,000 and instead of paying off the mortgage quicker, we're going to invest it. So in this scenario, the payoff is going to be in 30 years instead of 14. Now, that $1,000 that we're going to invest for 30 years at a 10% rate of return, and we're going to assume that this is all tax-free. You've put it into some sort of investment that is tax-sheltered or some sort of account that is tax-sheltered. Well, that ends up being worth $2,079,292 after 30 years. So what you can see is that the returns from investing the money rather than putting it onto your mortgage are significantly higher. And yes, in this scenario, after 30 years, you also have a fully paid off home. Now, just by looking at the numbers, the math is obvious. I mean, take a look at this. If you prioritize paying off your mortgage first, you end up with $1.1 million. But if you prioritize investing first, you end up with $2 million, almost $900,000 more than you would have had if you had chosen to pay off your mortgage first. But here's the thing. While the math might be obvious, the psychology is not so obvious. And this is where people make the big mistake when it comes to choosing between paying off your mortgage faster and investing. And I'm not going to lie here, I have also found myself in this situation, thinking that if I invested my money and chose not to pay off my mortgage quicker, that I would be better off. But then there was a whole bunch of weird scenarios that got thrown at me that caused me to make maybe not great decisions, like the 2008 financial crisis, and that led me to a situation where I quickly realized that maybe investing wasn't the best idea. And there's a whole bunch of reasons why it might not be the best idea. First of all is when markets correct, people panic. And quite often that means that they sell their investments because they're afraid of losing more money. So in 2008, when the financial crisis happened, and in 2020, when the pandemic hit, we saw a lot of people selling their investments out of fear. And in a lot of cases, what this meant, even though it seemed like the right thing to do, was that people were locking in their losses. And when they locked in their losses, they lost out on the opportunity to get significant gains that happened in the following years. So that 10% average return that we might expect from the S&P 500, well, that turned into a significantly lower average return because people make mistakes. And then on top of that, people tend to fail at long-term strategies. So while you may look at a 30-year time horizon and think, hey, I can do this, I can pay off my mortgage faster, or I can invest my money for 30 years, the reality is people's lives change, their goals change, and their stresses change. And that often causes them to deviate from the strategy that they thought they would be able to maintain for a long period of time. And in addition to that, people also often underestimate the benefit of being debt-free. They think, oh, if I've got a whole bunch of cash set aside, it doesn't really matter if I have a mortgage. But the reality is that things happen, stock market's correct, and usually when the stock market's correct, it's because the economy is going into the you-know-what, and when the economy goes into the you-know-what, that means job losses. And quite often it is those that thought that they would never be affected that are. And in times like this, there's a significant benefit to being mortgage-free and not having a lot of money versus being heavily indebted on your mortgage and losing 50 or 60% of your net worth in the stock market. And then combine that with the compounding effect of making the previously mentioned bad decisions. And well, you can see that there is some benefit to having less debt. And if all of that isn't enough, people often overestimate how good of investors they are. Most people who try to invest for themselves significantly underperform the market, with the average returns being around 4%. And quite often, it's those that believe that investing is a better option that are also those that believe that they're good enough investors to get the returns, and they often find out far too late that they aren't as good of investors as they thought. And unfortunately, human nature is just human nature, and we just aren't designed to be great investors, great financial strategists, and the majority of people will not find themselves in a situation where over the long run, they can outperform the market and follow through on a strategy that at the beginning seemed like it was a great idea. Now, that being said, both strategies have risk. The risks of prioritizing your mortgage payoff are that you may find yourself in a situation where you're cash poor. You've put all of your money into your mortgage and therefore you don't have money set aside should you need it. And of course, this can lead to problems like foreclosures. Now, in addition to that, the mortgage payoff strategy misses out on a significant amount of returns. The potential benefit of a strategy where you're prioritizing investing is, of course, the fact that your money is compounding over a longer period of time. So if you choose to pay off your mortgage first, well, you're potentially giving up a lot of returns. That's assuming, of course, that you are in fact able to get those 10% returns. And there's a bigger issue, and that is quite often the fact that when you are trying to get access to your equity, when you need it, when you have that job loss, when you have bills that you need to pay, if you have prioritized paying down your mortgage, it is often hard to re-access the extra funds that you have paid on that mortgage. And believe me, after 20 years of selling mortgages, I can tell you that it is always when you need it that you no longer qualify to access that extra money. Because unfortunately, when you go to the bank to get a loan for the money that you paid down on your mortgage, the bank has the option to not loan you the money, and therefore you find yourself potentially in a sticky situation. Now, of course, on the other hand, there are the risks associated with the investing strategy as well. The first is that when you are carrying debt in order to invest, you're exponentially increasing your risk. If you've essentially borrowed an extra $100,000 to invest $100,000 and you lose half of that money, well, you're now not only down half of your money, but you also owe that extra $100,000. And this is one of the things that people fail to mention when they're talking about leveraged investing strategies. You aren't just doubling your risk, you're increasing it significantly. And on top of that, the 10% guaranteed returns that you think you might get from investing in the stock market aren't actually guaranteed. In fact, there are going to be years that have significant drawdowns, and that is a major problem. Because in those years where you have significant drawdowns, it typically takes a significant amount of time to regain your losses. So for example, if your investments drop by 50%, you don't need to regain 50% over the following years to get back to even. You actually have to gain 100%. You have to double your money even though you only lost half of it previously. And that's where those average returns get a little bit tricky to understand. Now, on top of that, there's of course the aforementioned risk with respect to your investing knowledge, because most investors don't actually end up getting the returns that the S&P 500 gets. And while 10% returns might seem reasonable, the reality is most people won't get those returns. And if you don't get those returns, well, you're paying a significant amount of money for interest on your home, and you're often not getting the returns that are going to be necessary in order to cover those costs. Then, of course, there's just the amateur mistakes that people make when it comes to investing. Selling when they shouldn't be selling, not buying because they think the market just hit an all-time high and, well, prices can't go up any further, so I'm going to hold off on buying. And then all of a sudden the market goes up a ton and you missed out on the buying opportunities, pretty much ruining your chances of having that compounding effect that is so important to the investing strategy working. And then on top of that, you're exposing yourself to market fluctuations, which can cause stress, and there are definitely no guarantees when it comes to investing. The 10% return that you expect may in fact not actually be a 10% return at all. Now, of course, there's benefits to both of these strategies as well. Let's start with the mortgage payoff benefits. The first is that it's low risk. If you pay off your mortgage, you automatically get a 5% return because, well, you don't have to pay that interest anymore on the amount that you've prepaid. Of course, there's also the fact that you get mortgage free sooner. And there is a lot of benefit associated with being mortgage free. It gives you more options. Having no obligation to other people or banks is one of the most freeing things that somebody can have when it comes to their finances. And freedom equals options. And options are a good thing when it comes to living the life that you want to live. So what we often find is that when faced between the options of being completely mortgage free and having that freedom versus potentially and possibly having maybe an extra $1 million in the bank, people will choose the guarantee of financial freedom almost every single time. And then, of course, there's that really important piece that if you don't have a mortgage, no one can take your home. So all of this essentially equates to a guaranteed return. You will with certainty know that if you're making that extra $1,000 payment, that you're going to have your mortgage paid off sooner. You'll know the exact date, and you're going to know that at that point in time, you've got a pretty significant amount of cash flow that you can do with whatever you want, including investing it to try to catch up to the returns you would have got if you would have gone with the investing strategy. Now, the investing option also has its benefits. The first is that you have the higher potential returns. The numbers are pretty obvious on this. You also always have cash on hand, assuming that you don't lose a ton of money on your investments. Now, at this point, you may be looking at this and going, well, this all seems a little bit confusing, and I'm not sure which option I should take. Well, let's talk about who would benefit from each strategy. So the mortgage payoff option is ideal for people who, in general, have a hard time managing money. If you don't have significant savings already, then there's a good chance that paying off your mortgage so that you won't spend all of your money is probably a pretty good option for you. The second type of person is people who aren't comfortable investing, because let's face it, not everybody is comfortable investing their money in the S&P 500 or in gold or in any other number of investments. So for a lot of people, just being mortgage free is a better option purely because they don't have to worry about losing sleep at night, knowing that their investments could fluctuate and that they could end up with significantly less money tomorrow than they had today. And on top of that, the mortgage payoff strategy is definitely better for those who spend more than they earn on a pretty consistent basis. Because one of the ways that you can prevent yourself from losing your money or spending it is to apply it to that mortgage so that you don't have easy access to it when you just want to be a spendy pants. But most importantly, the mortgage payoff strategy is definitely best for those people who value security over returns. These are the types of people who have a low risk tolerance and just in general don't want to worry about their money evaporating. Now, on the other hand, investing is ideal for people who can stick to a long-term plan. Now, this is a very small percentage of the population. It's also great for people who have a high likelihood of increased income over the long run. So in other words, the type of person who is in a profession where they can pretty much bank on the fact that their income is going to go up. This is quite typically professionals. And it's also a good strategy for those who aren't emotional about returns. If there is in fact a drop in the stock market, they aren't going to worry about the fact that their investments have dropped in value. They're just going to continue buying and buying and buying until the value of the stocks comes back. And last but not least, it is great for sophisticated investors, people who just in general know how to invest and do it very well. But don't fool yourself into thinking you are one of these people if you don't have a long-term track record already. Now, the question is, what would I suggest? Because obviously I wrote a book about this where I thought that the investing model was the best model, and now I'm saying it might not be. Well, just like in an investment portfolio, I believe in diversification. So what that means is a hybrid model. And here's what the hybrid model would look like. First of all, you want to diversify. Split the money evenly, 500 and 500, or split it up 70% going towards your mortgage and 30% going towards your investing. And keep that split fairly consistent over time. If you choose a 50-50 split, keep it a 50-50 split until such time as your mortgage is paid off. And don't start paying off your mortgage until you have at least 12 months of retirement savings. So in other words, you can replace 12 months worth of income with the savings that you have in the accounts that you're going to use to fund your retirement. This is important because if in the event you do lose your job or something happens, you want to at least have some money on hand. And 12 months is a pretty good rule of thumb in order to avoid the potential risks of putting a whole bunch of that money onto your mortgage. So get 12 months worth of retirement savings saved first, and then start putting the money into the mortgage. And by doing a little bit of both, you're going to end up having the best of both worlds. You're not going to have to worry about risking all of your money in your investments, but you're also going to have a certain aspect of guaranteed returns. Because of course, when you pay off your mortgage and you no longer have to pay interest on the amount that you've paid off, well, that is in fact a guaranteed return. And if you can work out a hybrid model that is somewhere in the middle, the chances of you screwing it up because you aren't as good of an investor as you thought you might be, or because you make a bad decision at some point, is significantly less. So the reality here is the hybrid model is less about getting higher returns or lower returns, but it's about mitigating the risk that is in between your ears. And if you follow that strategy and do your best to stay on track for the next 30 years, well, regardless of which you choose, which is paying off your mortgage or investing or doing a little bit of both, you're probably going to end up being pretty happy once that mortgage is paid off and once you enter retirement. Oh, and if you want to see more videos like this on investing and mortgages, make sure you check out this one